Welcome campers. In today's video we're going to be doing the biggest project to date on the Jeep. A complete makeover on the rear axle. We're going to be doing a Ford 8.8 rear axle truss from Barnes 4-wheel drive and beefy shock mounts from StinkyFab Racing. Stay tuned. So this is all the parts we will be installing. This is the axle truss from Barnes. This is 1/4 inch steel and the rest is 3/16. You have to kind of build it yourself, but it is keyed, so it will be extremely easy to put together, and it should add a ton of strength to our rear axle, and it will go with future plans that we have suspension wise in the rear end of the Jeep. And right here is the shock mounts from StinkyFab Racing. These are 3/16 and they are beefy. What I really like about them is they have this angle that will deflect rocks a lot easier than the shock mounts that are on the rear axle now. So we shouldn't be getting as caught up on rocks as we're going through trails, and they are completely adjustable. So you could just stick the end of your shock in there, get your measurement, and you could weld on that rear tab to whatever width you want, so it can work with a huge variety of shocks. So now the plan is to completely remove everything from the rear end. I'm going to remove the gas tank, the shocks, the drive shaft, pull the rear axle, pull the leaf springs, and drop the gas tank. It's going to be a ton of work. I'm not going to bore you guys with it. I'll just give you random updates if I see anything interesting. And once I have all of that removed, we will get to mocking up the truss and tracing it out and tack welding it to the axle. So with the plug welds all done up and those two pieces sticking to each other, I have the truss on the housing, and my plan is to get this inner part of the truss lined up with the rib of the housing right here, just to make it look uniform and look better or look good. And I'm gonna just take a Sharpie and kind of go around it, you know, get a general idea, like mark it down here so I know how low to grind, since there's little ribs that will come off of the truss onto there. And I'm just gonna get it, you know, generally marked up. I'm not welding it to the cast at all, because that takes, you know, a little bit different of a process. And honestly, I don't have that much skill welding. I'm not a professional welder, so I don't even want to try that. So the plan is to just weld the truss to the axle tubes themselves. I'm just giving a general outline too. It's not going to be anything pretty because I'm going to be hitting it all with a grinder, and then from there I will be cleaning the entire axle tube with acetone. So I'm just getting a general area of where I will be hitting it with the grinder. Oh, that line's off. Whatever. Cool. So the mounts I bought, the high clearance mounts, are the same width as my Chrysler 8 1/4 mounts that were cut off and welded onto the 8.8. So my plan was to figure out how far, you know, after I chopped these, was to measure from the edge of the cast to the edge of the shock mount right here, the inner edge. And then, so when I cut this off and I clean this up fully, it will be easy on where I can mark it and put this mount and then tack weld it on and fully weld it in. And it looks like on the passenger side or the driver's side of the axle is about 9 1/8 inches. So I'm gonna write on the mount itself, driver 9 1/8, passenger 6 1/4. So then I know 6 1/4 from the tube and 9 1/8 from the tube for this side. All right, we got the axle tubes completely cleaned up with the acetone. I got the truss sitting there exactly where I want it. And now the plan is, it's heavy enough to hold itself down so I could just run a tiny tack weld on both sides to hold the truss in place completely. So that is the plan now. I'll tack it to the housing, and then from there, the hardest part is done. Yeah, that thing is on there now. That's a good weld. All right, so I have about 1.5 inch weld on each side of the truss onto the housing. And yeah, that's not going anywhere. So I'm about ready to pull it off the jack stand. So the plan now is I'm just gonna jump around. I'll do a little weld in here, jump to the other side, do another little weld. Just keep jumping back and forth, give it some breaks every 2 or 3 welds just to let it cool down so I don't get the housing too hot. And yeah, that's the plan. Just completely get about a dozen 1 to 2 inch welds on the housing, and I think it'll be fine. Dang! I like that one right there. I'll just have to get that piece of wire out of there. All right, that's beautiful. That right there makes me want to actually weld the entire housing, just to have some, pretty good looking welds on there. Well, this side is completely welded to the axle. For some reason, for the life of me, I could not get some of that to fully weld, so it looks a little bubbly, but it's so close to the housing that I'm not even going to mess with it anymore. I'm just going to leave it. Whatever happens, happens. It's too risky, so I'm going to keep it, but the rest of it looks really, really good. So what I'm going to do is just clean it up with the wire brush, both sides, get it looking as nice as possible, and then we will get these ribs trimmed down on the edges to fit over the welds, and then I'll get those tacked on and fully welded in, and then we are completely done with the truss, other than the mount that goes from the top of the truss to the cast on the axle and bolts on. So this is what I mean. I rounded out the top and the bottom to make it fit flush in there. So now I'll just have to get it kind of lined up so it looks even and not all jacked up. Just like that. I'll hold it steady, I'll give it a tack weld, and then I'll move on to the next one. So the ribs on both sides are completely welded in, 100%. Now the only thing I gotta do is bolt the support in to these 3 holes, clamp it on top real tight, and weld the support on, and the axle truss is completely done. Now here is the final support. I think this is a pinion support that they include with their trusses. It just bolts in, then it goes to the top, and you just weld that bad boy on. Honestly, I think you would have to weld it underneath, but since I, screwed up 2 things on this truss, I'm just gonna have to weld it on top and call it good. And after I weld this, the truss will be 100% done, other than cleaning it up with acetone and painting it. The truss is completely done. I think I have a little bit of time left over to start chopping off those shock mounts so I could just clean up the tube in the morning and get those shock mounts tacked on. These Chrysler 8 1/4 shock mounts have seen better days. They're the originals that came on the original rear axle that the shop I got my Ford 8.8 swap done by. Cut them off and welded them onto this housing. I'm excited to get the StinkyFab mounts put on because they're at a better angle and they're a little bit shorter. So ultimately, if I do lift the Jeep higher in the future, I can use the same shock mounts for the lift, since the new shock mounts will be shorter than these ones. All right, well, the bulk of the shock mounts are chopped off. Now I'll just have to take a flap disc and completely get rid of all this metal, just so it's down to the axle tube on both sides. And once that is done, we can mock up these StinkyFab mounts, get them tacked on and fully welded in. So now that I have the old brackets completely cut off the axle, I'm going to prep these a little bit more. What I'm going to do to help with some drainage is I'm going to drill a hole in the bottom of the mount, because when this tab welds in there and the shock loop is in the bottom of it, it won't have any drainage to let mud or dirt or rocks or anything out. So I'm going to drill a hole in the bottom for that, because I will be welding the sides. I'm going to leave this spot in the back for drainage behind the tab. So there will be some drainage right there, and then I'll have some drainage in the bottom. But I'm going to weld up the sides for some strength. And then after I do that and I clean it up, I'm going to mock up the eyelet of the shock in there, so I know the distance I need to put this tab. Then once I get the tab in there flat, or before I do that, I'm going to take the nut. It's a 1/2 inch bolt, so I'm going to take the 1/2 inch nut and I'm going to tack weld it to the back of this so it's captured, just to make life easier. So I'm going to tack weld it on 2 sides to hold it in place, and then once I have the distance in there of the eyelet of the shock, I will tack weld the tab in there and then try to weld in as much as I possibly can. And then after all of that is done, I will tack weld them to the axle and get those fully welded on. And then from there, the axle is complete, other than cleaning it up with a brake cleaner and acetone to get it as clean as possible before I paint it. So now that I got the holes drilled and got it cleaned up underneath, the plan now is to weld the nut onto the plate to have a captured nut. So what I'm going to do is kind of position them against each other like that, or figure out a way to prop this up, and then I will completely get this tab perfect with the front, because they're the same shape. And then I'll get the nut kind of centered, and I'm just going to do a tack weld on each side, and then this nut will go on the inside of the bracket that I will weld in. All right, with those nuts tack welded on there, it did kind of bubble the nylon on the inside of the nut just a little bit, but that's no big deal to me. With them tack welded on there though, these are done. I'll just clean them up a tiny bit, and then we will get to mocking up the shock in there with the tab, and I'll get it all figured out, and then I will tack. Once I pull the shock out and I figure out my distance, I'll mark it, and then I'll put the tab in there, tack weld it, and then we will fully weld them in. They'll be good to go, and then I can tack weld them on the axle. So I got it all mocked up. I think I'm going to keep the shock in there. I'm just going to put a wet rag or a wet towel over the entire thing, and then I will tack weld that tab on the back of it. And then I will have the tab a little bit farther in to the back of the shock, just to give some more freedom for when I put the shock inside. It won't be such a tight squeeze or anything. So instead of on the inside, I just completely welded the sides of the inner one. So instead of welding the outsides of the tab, I just welded the insides of it, and I tacked it also. And then I went around and I welded the entire thing for the most strength I could possibly have, other than those holes, just so I can have drain holes for the nut side and then for the shock side also. I did the same for this side, ran beads on the inside and tacked it. Then I welded it on the outside and cleaned it up, and I'm really happy with them. So now the plan now is tack weld them to the axle, and from there fully weld them in and the axle will be done. So I have the lines marked on the axle tube on where the inside of the shock mount will go on the axle. The passenger side is 6 1/4 inches, while the driver is 9 3/8. What my plan is I have my angle finder on the front of it, and I'm gonna try to get them as close to 90 degrees as possible, because that's how I think the other ones were from the shop. So if that's not the case, I mean, I'm gonna try to get it as close to 90 degrees as possible. If so, and that's not right, then roast me down below, but I think they were at 90 degrees, so that's how I'm gonna run it. So you guys will see me try to hold this at 90 degrees and tack weld it on without screwing it up. Well, I did not set my welding hood to the weld setting. I kept it on the grinding setting, so there goes my eyeballs. But it is at 89.8 degrees. I'm going to call that a win for 90 degrees on this side. 0.2 of a degree I don't think will make a huge difference. But the passenger side mount is tacked on. Now we'll tack on the driver's side. All right, that's 89.9 degrees. I think that's as close to 90 as I'm gonna get. And I am gonna get these fully welded on now. If anything crazy happens, I'll get you guys. If not, I'll fully weld them in and we'll be good to go. Beautiful. So all I will have is some on the inside to weld and some on the bottom. Then this side will be completely welded in. Now we'll jump over to the other side and get that one burned in some. All right, the whole outside of this mount is welded. Now we'll jump back to the other side and I'll mount the back side and some of the inside. And then from there, once that side is welded some more, I'll jump in here. All right, you guys, I got to get Bean in almost every video. He's the star of the channel. I just want to let you know I do have these shock mounts fully welded on. I'll show you some of that in a second, but I know you guys have to get your fix of Bean. So here he is. Say hi to everyone on the YouTubes, Bean. All right, you guys, I'll show you the shock mounts now. All right, these shock mounts are fully welded on. I did as far as I can on the inside, welded in, and then I have the entire outside welded and the back side. So these things aren't going anywhere. I think the only thing I will do is maybe, ooh, that's hot. I'm gonna run a bead along right there on the bottom just for that extra strength. I think I'll do that on both of them, and then the axle is completely done. All right, now that the shock mounts are 100% welded in, the axle is fully done. I'm just gonna give it another scrub down with the wire brush and hit it with the grinder to get everything all cleaned up. Then from there, I'll put a coat of paint on it and show you guys the final product, and we'll finish up this video. And we are all done. Right here is the Barnes 4-wheel drive Ford 8.8 rear truss install, along with the StinkyFab Racing high clearance shock mounts. I just put a fresh coat of paint on it, so it will look a lot better. I can't wait to get this thing underneath the Jeep to take it out on some trails and bash it on some rocks to test out those welds and the strength of the truss overall now. So my biggest worry was the brake lines, but I was able to make my old ones work. I just had to do some slight bending to make them run on top of the truss. I know it's not going to be pretty, but I'm going over function over looks because, you know, it's not a SEMA vehicle with Bluetooth drive shafts, so it needs to work. But yeah, I was able to bend them in place. I'm going to use this clamp on top of the truss. I'll just have to drill a hole through the truss so I can bolt it on there. And then since my distribution block is steel, I'm going to tack weld that in place right around there. And it should work out just fine. And then I'll, once I get everything marked out and everything drilled and tack welded, I'm going to tape off the distribution block, paint it, pull the brake lines off, hit them with a bunch of brake cleaner to clean them up, and then paint those. And then once I get it all together, I will show you guys. Well, I got the brake lines cleaned up, painted. Everything is tight on there. I have the clamp, the rubber covered clamp right there to hold the brake line in place so it doesn't rub or get caught on anything. And I got it going across, and then this is the distribution block. I got that bolted on there, got everything painted, and the axle is officially done. So now I got some other stuff to do to the Jeep, and then I will be putting it in. All right, you guys, if you've gotten this far in the video, I want to thank you so much for watching. It means a ton to us. And if you can, like the video. That helps us out a lot on YouTube. Also, comment down below. Let me know if you guys would put an axle truss on your rear axle on your Jeep, or if I did anything wrong, or if you have any suggestions or anything like that. That would help us out a lot also. And if you haven't, subscribe to the channel so you can see more of our DIY videos like this one, our trip videos, and also our product reviews. I hope you guys have a good one. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.